Pleasure to be joined by Paul Daugherty. Doc, we're sitting here going around and around and around. I loved the morning line that you posted right after the game last night, and I concur with you 1,000%. It was at least refreshing to see that Zach Taylor, after winning another coin toss, said, let's take the football. And why wouldn't you with at least this offense theoretically, that they put on the field every single week?
I couldn't agree more. In fact, Tom, I've never understood why anyone would defer. What that says to me is that you lack confidence in your offense to set the tone. And why would anybody lack confidence in this particular offense? I mean, it's not Zach. The whole league does it. And I've argued the defer thing the same way I've argued forever that why is fourth down automatically a punt down? Now, the NFL, maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, started coming around on that, agreeing with me and others that, don't waste fourth down. God and Vince Lombardi gave you 4 downs to make another 4 downs. Use all 4 of them, right? But the thing with deferring and the logic that, we get the ball to start the second half. Well, so what? Why don't you want the ball to start the first half? Isn't football about being aggressive and imposing your will and telling teams this is our day, not yours? You don't do that by deferring. So, yeah, good for Zach, and I hope that they do that the rest of the year. There's no reason for them not to do that the rest of the year.
After I read the morning line, and you can find it at substack.com, after I read it yesterday, I meant to sit down and look up a stat because for years and years and years, and I'm sure it still holds true today, the team that scores first in baseball, I think, won at roughly about 66 to 67% of the time. I don't know what that number is, Doc. Maybe you do in football, but I'm with you. And we were just talking about the Cleveland Browns. And how that's a team that if they get up on you, they're going to start to run and run and run and run and pound you into submission, and Lord knows they're capable of doing it with Nick Chubb back there. But the Bengals or anybody else, who wants to play when you're ahead by a touchdown after your first series of the year? Every single hand in the room goes up, count me in.
Yeah, I think Burrow said as much after the game. That's how we want to play when you're ahead by 7 instead of behind by 7. It opens up the playbook to a certain extent. You can do just about anything you want when you get behind and teams know you got to pass. They can defend against that. I think more than anything, though, Tom, I don't know anything about the numbers in terms of success if you score first. It set the tone. It sent the message that needed sending, which is, we're not going to wait around and hope good things are going to happen. We're going to make them happen. I think Burrow on that first drive was 8 for 10. He threw 10 passes on the first drive. And that was obviously with the intent of getting some confidence back, getting back to who they were in the second half of last year. And, it worked out exactly the way it should have.
It was interesting. I think when they scored their second touchdown, I was in the car, and I thought I heard Dave Lapham or Dan Horde make the comment that as high-powered as this offense is, I think they said yesterday it was the first time in their last 7 or 8 games, going back to last season, of course, where the Bengals offense scored more than 2 touchdowns in a game. That march through the playoffs last year largely was due to playing great defense and Evan McPherson. So maybe on multiple levels, this had something to do with Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow and everybody else coming out and saying, listen, we got to start being the offense we should be. I thought it was great. I'm sure you would concur that they've not forgotten that Tyler Boyd is on this team. This guy's a player, Tyler Boyd. I always love this guy. He never complains about not getting the ball and why are they always throwing to Chase and Higgins and all that kind of thing. They might have to let him walk out the door, but boy, he is a really good player for this team.
Well, he opens up a lot of the deep stuff for the other 2 guys. The fact that you got to account for him in the slot coming across the middle, short and intermediate routes, means you got one less guy to look after T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. I think the biggest takeaway from yesterday, Tom, is let Joe be Joe. Let Burrow, whatever Burrow wants, give it to him. And he wanted the coin flip thing and take the ball, and they did it, and it worked. And he came out firing. You know, you get him going early, you get that rhythm established, the confidence, and everything flows from there. Getting ahead early on the Jets yesterday allowed them to go after Joe Flacco, who I think sometime next week will be filing for Medicare. I mean, I don't think the NFL has ever had a 107-year-old quarterback before. But nevertheless, getting ahead on them helps the defense, as we saw. So let Joe be Joe. Let the offense do what it needs to do. And along the way, try to find yourselves some semblance of a running game.
What are your thoughts initially, Doc, on this Miami game coming up? You know, Dolphins 3-0. They rallied in spectacular fashion to stun Baltimore 2 weeks ago. Buffalo looked like the best team on the planet through the first 2 games of the year. Everybody picked to go to the Super Bowl, and yet they really, really stood up, especially on defense against Josh Allen and the Bills. This all of a sudden, I'm not so sure everybody thought about it when the season started, but this all of a sudden has the makings of a really good game Thursday night here in Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's one reason it's silly but fun to look at the schedule when it comes out and try to pick the number of wins, the record. And when the schedule came out, nobody was thinking that the Dolphins were going to be 3-0. I think the biggest thing about this game, Tom, something that should play into the Bengals' hands. Miami is coming off an emotional game in which they had to defend 90 plays in 90-degree heat. And now they've got 4 days to get ready. And Tua looked a little shaky physically, as everybody saw, whether it was his back or his head or whatever. He was not in the greatest of shape. And actually, he's been a gamer and he's been good, and they've won all 3. He's not Joe Burrow. He's not quite as good as he's not quite in that league. So I think the Bengals are catching the Dolphins at a really good time, especially on a Thursday night.
You're a guy that is written about from time to time through the years, and this really bothered me over the weekend. And that is some of the shots we're seeing to players in the head area. The T. Higgins hit yesterday was as brutal a hit as I have seen in a long time. It was straight out, full momentum, 190, 200-pound defensive back, chiseled out of stone, running as fast as he can, lowers his helmet, pow, right into the helmet, splits open Higgins' lip. He was able to come back and play in the game. But the Tua thing, I know they're saying it's a back thing. Look, I'm not going to accuse anybody of lying, but I have a hard time understanding how officials are missing a lot of this stuff. And I know they're out there doing the best they can, and they're 50 and 60-year-old men, 40-year-old men trying to keep up with 20-something-year-old men in a very fast, violent game. But, man, some of these hits and calls, Doc, they're missing. There's a risk of some serious, serious injury in this sport right now, the speed at which they're playing.
Well, I think one problem is, Tom, that a lot of those calls are subjective. You know what I mean? They're not obvious, like a hold or a block in the back or offside penalty or delay of game. Those are obvious, kind of cut and dried things. The guys go after each other, like you say, so fast. They're so quick. I mean, you could argue the other side of what you're saying, Tom, is that, well, that guy just couldn't stop himself. What is he supposed to do? He's chasing the guy, his momentum carries him into him, and at the last second, the guy ducks his head. And what are you supposed to do? Your head as a tackler is not aimed toward his head as a ball carrier, but he ducks his head in a millisecond, and he makes contact with your helmet, and you get the penalty. I see that side of it too. You can't make. I don't know that you can make the helmet any better. I don't know that you can make the game any safer. And you're right, the guys get bigger, faster, stronger every year. The hits are more violent every year. We're seeing it more in college than we ever did before. Guys getting carted off, guys getting concussed. It's sort of like NASCAR, right? You cannot make the sport completely safe just with gadgets, with new inventions. The hardest helmet, the best helmet in the world is not going to protect you in football if you get knocked, head on at 100 miles an hour by a guy who wants to take your head off. So it's a problem. And I don't know what they do about it, to tell you the truth.
Speaking of the college game, UC hosts Indiana, and I think it's a perfect example of how far this program has come. And a lot of people out there are saying, duh, they made it to the college football playoff last year as a non-Power 5 team. No kidding. But to play a Big Ten team, and I don't think Indiana's necessarily very good, but they do have a lot of good players. They recruit relatively well. They had not lost a game this year. UC was not even on top of its game, so to speak, in many facets of the game, and yet it's a 21-point win. I'm not so sure UC loses again this year.
Yeah, it's tough to say you can run the table. But, yeah, I think they have that chance. I think the big thing about that win, as you said, it just kind of puts another brick in the wall of UC's credibility. And you're right, Indiana's just okay, but they're so-called Power 5 school, and they play in the Big Ten. And UC handled them last year and handled them more easily this year. And I think that's a feather in the cap. Another, like I said, another brick in the wall for UC credibility-wise heading into a so-called Power 5 conference. Another thing I think it did fairly effectively was end any mention of any quarterback controversy.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody out there today saying that Evan Prater should be starting ahead of Ben Bryant. I think Prater can still work for them as a situational guy when the time demands it, but Ben Bryant's the guy going forward, and it's never really healthy when you got so-called controversy at quarterback, and I think that's pretty much over now.
Last thing I mentioned a moment ago, and that is, for guys our age, and this is continuing in the vein of college football. Now, I know Florida State is off to a 4-0 start this year. But I tell you, Doc, I just scratch my head because we could have said the same thing, not necessarily about Alabama. And there are a lot of people that forget this. They had the Bear Bryant years, and then things went really south for a long, long time. Mike Shula was down there. Some other guys were down there. They got in some trouble. Gene Stallings, I think, was down there for a long, long time. But over the last 15 years, Alabama's been Alabama. But when we were younger, you had Nebraska, you had Florida State, you had Miami of Florida, and you had the University of Texas, that virtually every single year they were going to be in the conversation of being a national championship contending team. And here over the weekend, you have Miami of Florida that loses to Middle Tennessee State University. I just can't believe how some of these programs, especially Nebraska and Florida State, and Miami to a little bit lesser extent, I just can't believe how far they have fallen.
I can't disagree with you, especially for a place like Miami, which really had it rolling for a while and had developed its own brand, for lack of a better term. You knew if you went to the U, what kind of experience you were in for, for better or worse. They were good time guys that like to have fun and beat the crap out of you on Saturdays. I remember Chad Johnson telling me way back in the day that Howard Schnellenberger built that team into a winner essentially by driving around the mostly African-American neighborhoods in Miami. Liberty City was where Chad was from, in a really nice fancy car, like in the middle of the week, and just talking to kids around there who played football. Hey, you ought to give us a try. You ought to give us a shot. And from that, the U as we know it was born. So I don't know whether they're not recruiting well. I don't know how you can't recruit well to a place like that. But you're right. It's been a while for Miami. They haven't been really good for as long as I can remember, Tom. And Nebraska, I don't know. I think Tom Osborne was Nebraska, and once Tom Osborne was no longer Nebraska, Nebraska ceased being Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, but it's just so hard to believe. I know Florida State's back in the rankings again. They're like 22nd, 23rd, 4-0, and have a big game coming up this weekend. So we'll see how that all plays out. But it's just I just find it stunning that all of these schools have gone to 2, 3, 4, 5, if not more coaches over a 15, 20, 25-year time frame. They have all the money in the world, all of them, and yet – they can't replicate what's going on at places like Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia and some of these places, Clemson, year after year after year, just dominating college football.
You know what else, Tom? The secret got out about Florida football early, mid-'80s. You want fast, athletic kids. You go to Florida and get them. They're there just to be picked like apples off a tree. That didn't really take effect in a negative way for the Florida schools for immediately. But now everybody knows that Florida is a gold mine for high school football players, and everybody is taking advantage of it. And all the kids, or a lot of the kids that Miami and Florida State and Florida used to get, they go elsewhere. It's not just happy hunting for the local guys anymore. Everybody knows about Florida. And it's been a steady kind of migration of really great high school football talent from Florida just about everywhere else.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And that's where Urban Meyer really changed the whole landscape at Ohio State after spending so many years at the University of Florida. Now they get players coming out of there left and right. All right, Doc, we'll catch up at the end of the week to preview as we get closer to the Bengals and the Miami Dolphins. Thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Tom. Talk to you soon.
All right, buddy. That's a morning line at Substack.